Hi there, welcome to video number 25 of 2021. I'm Dave Palmer. Thanks for joining me. And in this one, I'm going to talk about Adam and Eve before the fall, before original sin. And I'm going to tell you 5 teachings from St. Thomas Aquinas that you probably don't know. Now, some of you may know these. I'm guessing that you don't. I'm actually going to teach you a little bit more than 5, but I think some of them you're going to know already. And I also want to explain at the end of this video why this matters. Why does it matter that we know what Adam and Eve were before the sin of original sin and also afterwards? And what does that have to do with us in 2021? I think it's actually quite important. And so I hope that you'll stick with me. It's a lot of information I'm going to give to you. It's very important. I'll go as quickly as I possibly can while still teaching the basis of what this is all about. Okay, so let's go on. And first of all, Thomas asks in the Summa whether in the state of innocence man would have been immortal. Okay, would man have not died, not suffered corruption? And you probably know this already. In fact, I don't even include this in the 5 things that you probably don't know, because had Adam and Eve not sinned, they would not have died. And I bet you already know that, right? So he goes on and says, a thing may be incorruptible on the part of its efficient cause. In this sense, man was incorruptible and immortal in the state of innocence. All right, there's different terms for Adam and Eve before the fall: the state of original justice, the state of original rectitude, the state of innocence. And so it all basically means the same thing, and we're going to explain what it does. For as Augustine says, God made man immortal as long as he did not sin, so that he might achieve for himself life or death. For man's body was indissoluble, not by reason of any intrinsic vigor of immortality, but by reason of a supernatural force given by God to the soul, whereby it was enabled to preserve the body from all corruption, so long as it remained itself subject to God. So it was a gift that God gave to original man that was not, it was permanent to the degree that as long as Adam and Eve didn't fall away from God and didn't commit original sin, then they were going to live forever, right? So I think you already probably knew that. Let's move on to the next one, and this is whether the first man was created in grace. Now, you should memorize the definition of grace. It's a participation in the life of God. And of course, grace plays a big part in our life. We can't even begin to try to turn to God without grace. God always makes the first move. Okay, we participate in the life of God most fully in heaven. Okay, this is what really this whole video is about, is a hope that we should have of spending eternity with God. And if we don't have that hope, we live differently. We live for this world, and we live to be healthy. We live to, acquire as many riches as possible. And it's just a whole different mindset that we see played out quite a bit in the world today. This is interesting as far as the grace, because it says, some say that man was not created in grace, but that it was bestowed on him subsequently before sin, and many authorities of the saints declare that man possessed grace in the state of innocence. Okay, but the very rectitude of the primitive state, okay, this is before the fall, wherewith man was endowed by God, seems to require that, as others say, he was created in grace. All right, then he quotes Ecclesiastes 7:30, God made man right. For this rectitude consisted in his reason being subject to God, the lower powers to reason, and the body to the soul. And the first subjection was the cause of both the second and the third. Now it is clear that such a subjection of the body to the soul and of the lower powers to reason was not from nature, otherwise it would have remained after sin. And we know that after sin, that's when a war was created within us, where we want too much sleep, and we have inordinate sexual desires, and we want too much food, and envy and lust, and envy is actually a spiritual sin, but lust and gluttony and these kind of things, right? Laziness, that's all the result of original sin and concupiscence. Okay, all right, so now we're going to get into the ones where I bet you didn't know. You probably knew there was grace. You probably knew that Adam and Eve were immortal, but did you know that they had all of the virtues? Isn't that interesting? Thomas says yes, Adam and Eve possessed all of the virtues, because in the state of innocence, man, in a certain sense, possessed all the virtues. And this can be proved from what proceeds. Such was the rectitude of the primitive state that reason was subject to God and the lower powers to reason, which we just talked about with the outpouring of grace. Now the virtues are nothing but those perfections whereby reason is directed to God, and the inferior powers regulated according to the dictate of reason. Wherefore the rectitude of the primitive state required that man should, in a sense, possess every virtue. Okay, there was order, there was rectitude, there was integrity between our reason and God, and the passions and reason. Okay, and it was peaceful, and that's why Adam and Eve would have experienced the fruits of the Holy Spirit of joy and peace and self-control, because there wasn't that battle going on like we feel right now in the state post-original sin. Okay, did man know all things? This is another one. I bet you didn't know this. Epistemology has to do with the study of knowledge, how we come to know things. And sure enough, interestingly, Thomas says that no one can instruct others unless he has knowledge. And so the first man was established by God in such a manner as to have knowledge of all those things for which man has a natural aptitude. And such are whatever are virtually contained in the first self-evident principles, that is, whatever truths man is naturally able to know. So think of, what can we naturally know? We can know algebra and trigonometry and physics and the Pythagorean theorem and the periodic chart and a lot of things we can come to know. But Adam and Eve already knew all these. It was like infused knowledge, like the angels have, right? Moreover, in order to direct his own life and that of others, man needs to know not only those things which can be naturally known, but also things surpassing natural knowledge, because the life of man is directed to a supernatural end. Just as it is necessary for us to know the truths of faith in order to direct our own lives. Wherefore, the first man was endowed with such a knowledge of these supernatural truths as was necessary for the direction of human life in that state. This is amazing. I bet you didn't know that. Tell me if I'm wrong. Comment and say, no, I already knew that. I bet you most people don't know this. That not only did Adam and Eve know all things naturally that they could come to know, but they also knew of their supernatural end. They knew of heaven. They knew of hell. They knew of purgatory. They knew all the things that they need to know in order to achieve their supernatural end. These are the kind of things that we have to be taught through the church. All right, through divine law. That's the divine law. All right, whether passions existed in the soul of the first man. Okay, so did they get scared, or did they have hope? Did they have joy, and did they get angry? In the first man. And Thomas is basically going to say, and I'm going to paraphrase this: the passions of the soul are in the sensual appetite, the object of which is good and evil. Wherefore, some passions of the soul are directed to what is good, as love and joy, others to what is evil, as fear and sorrow. So Thomas is going to say here that those passions which are directed to good, like joy and let's say excitement and hope, he would have those. But since there could be no unhappiness in that original state, there wouldn't have been any sorrow or despair or inordinate anger. There really wouldn't have been anything to be angry about in the first place, right? Very interesting. I bet you didn't know that. Okay, two more, and then we'll be done. This one says, whether the first man saw God through his essence, okay? And by his essence, it means God's essence. Did man see God through God's essence? And this is really interesting, okay? The first man did not see God through his essence if we consider the ordinary state of that life, unless perhaps it be said that he saw God in a vision when God cast a deep sleep upon Adam. Let me move this, make myself a little bit smaller, okay? The reason is because since in the divine essence is beatitude itself, the intellect of a man who sees the divine essence has the same relation to God as a man has to beatitude. Now it is clear that man cannot willingly be turned away from beatitude, since naturally and necessarily he desires it and shuns unhappiness. Wherefore no one who sees the essence of God can willingly turn away from God, which means to sin. Okay, we know that Adam and Eve did sin. So this is the way Thomas Aquinas figures out that they didn't see God through God's essence, because otherwise it would have been impossible for them to sin. Okay, they still had free will, they still were able to turn away, and they did, okay, but there's no way that they could have seen God through his essence, because it's impossible to turn away. That's like somebody in heaven turning away from God, which is pretty much impossible. Hence, all who see God through his essence are so firmly established in the love of God that for eternity they can never sin. Therefore, as Adam did sin, it is clear that he did not see God through his essence. All right? One more. Nevertheless, he did know God with a more perfect knowledge than we do now. Thus, in a sense, his knowledge was midway between our knowledge in the present state and the knowledge we shall have in heaven when we see God through his essence. To make this clear, we must consider that the vision of God through his essence is contradistinguished from the vision of God through his creatures. All right, this is where it gets very practical. Now, the higher the creature is, and the more like it is to God, the more clearly is God seen in it. For instance, a man is seen more clearly through a mirror in which his image the more clearly is expressed. Thus, God is seen in a much more perfect manner through his intelligible effects than through those which are only sensible or corporeal. Okay, this is why the angels have higher intellect than us, because they're not coming to know things through sensible creatures. It's being infused. But in his present state, man is impeded as regards the full and clear consideration of intelligible creatures, because he is distracted by and occupied with sensible things. Now it is written, God made man right. All right, so it's really important we understand this, because if our end is God, our goal is beatitude, do we understand what heaven's like? In order to understand heaven, we have to understand our present state, and right in between those two states was Adam and Eve before the fall. So it may be hard for us to understand heaven, but we can kind of get there by understanding the pre-lapse, the pre-fall Adam and Eve. That's why this is practical. This is important, okay? All right, the last one, I bet you didn't know this, whether Adam and Eve in the state of innocence had mastership over all the animals, right? So you may think, well, I've got mastership over my dog, or maybe a cat. Sometimes I think the cats are harder to have mastership over, okay? But, for the most part, dogs will do what we ask them to do. Not always, right? But I don't think you have mastership over this animal, this creature, okay? Can you believe that in the original state, Adam and Eve had mastership over sharks and whales and you name it, cockroaches, right? This is kind of light, but I find this interesting. Okay, so Thomas says, for his disobedience to God, man was punished by the disobedience of those creatures which should be subject to him. Therefore, in the state of innocence, before man had disobeyed, nothing disobeyed him that was naturally subject to him. Now, all animals are naturally subject to man. This can be proved in three ways. First, from the order observed by nature. For just as in the generation of things we perceive a certain order of procession of the perfect from the imperfect, thus matter is for the sake of form, and the imperfect form for the sake of the perfect, so also is there order in the use of natural things, thus the imperfect are for the use of the perfect, as the plants make use of the earth for their nourishment, and animals make use of plants, and man makes use of both plants and animals. Therefore, it is in keeping with the order of nature that man should be master over animals. Okay, the other two reasons are explained, but I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. But suffice it to say, all the animals were under his control. That's one of the things that he lost when Adam and Eve sinned. Okay, so were those 5 things that you didn't know before? Did you know about the passions? Did you know that Adam and Eve knew all things, that they had all the virtues, that they had mastership over all of the animals, and also just the order of grace, and just some interesting stuff, right? And so let me know in the comments and share this video, because believe me, in the kind of times that we're living in right now, we basically have 2 choices. We can either live for the world or we can live for eternity. We can live for beatitude, and that doesn't mean we don't enjoy the world that we're living in now, but we can't put all of our eggs in this temporal basket, and we must begin to contemplate and consider and think about eternal life. Okay, that's why I think these 5 teachings from St. Thomas Aquinas that you probably didn't know are very important. God bless you. Thanks for watching.